Everybody ready? Welcome, everyone, to the Eugene City Council work session for January 20th. Welcome to those watching at home. And we have a pretty good room full of people here, so welcome. Today we're going to be talking about a work session on the functional consolidation of the fire department. I want to point out that although you have a motion on the yellow sheet here, there is no motion, but this is for the purpose of discussion today to really flesh out anything that people need to know or talk more about. And the other thing I want to say is we had a committee that worked very hard on this, a lot of people who worked really hard on it, and I appreciate that, but we really haven't had the council discussion, and that seems like a really important discussion for us to have together, as well as having it in front of the community so that they can get up to speed on the issue as well. So, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. And just a couple of brief thoughts. One, just a reminder on Saturday for our part 2 of your goal sessions is at 10 o'clock, and it's in the McNutt room for Saturday. That'll also be televised for people at home that would like to watch that. And then with respect to today, just a couple of thoughts. This is a pretty important discussion, I think, for us in the community. This is, I think, a real opportunity to take a look at how we're providing services in sort of a coordinated partnership way. And there's really 3 different pieces, and I just want to sort of set the stage. One piece that we're not wanting, or isn't on the table today, is the whole topic about the ambulance fund. We've had some conversations about that. You'll have more conversations about that, particularly as we move into the budget with the Budget Committee. But that's not the purpose of today's conversation. When we talk about functional consolidation or merger, there's really 2 pieces that go along with that. One of those is doing some operational consolidation that improves efficiencies, has opportunity to save some dollars, and we're proceeding with some of those. I've been working with Gino, and the chiefs have been working together, and those are things like sharing training resources, fire marshals, and some of those kinds of things I think make just some operational and a financial sense. And so we are starting to move forward with some of those through an intergovernmental agreement to have some conversation there. What we're really the third and probably the more significant piece is the whole topic around a merger. And because a merger has a lot of different components to it. Some are functional, some are operational, some are governance issues and those kinds of things. And we really would like to get your feedback today on the concept or the discussion around the merger piece of this, and get your input. So we'll be doing a lot of listening after the chief gives a brief overview. So just a couple of distinctions there. So, Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As the manager said, we really have 2 issues before us, but we're only going to be discussing one, and that's the opportunities around the merger. In an era of financial challenge, new and creative solutions are necessary for sustaining community services. To this end, Springfield Fire Chief Dennis Murphy and I believe we can deliver more efficient and effective fire rescue and emergency medical services under a merged organization of the Eugene and Springfield Fire Departments. The first tangible accomplishments of this initiative were achieved in June of 2007 when the Eugene and Springfield Fire Departments completed a functional consolidation of our community's emergency response capabilities. The new model, known as the 3-battalion system, combined the field response capabilities of both departments. Under our 3-battalion system, the closest personnel and equipment are dispatched to calls for service without regard to jurisdictional boundaries. 2.5 years later, the 3-battalion system has improved response times to emergency calls, provided better community backup coverage during large incidents, and afforded a better level of safety for our responders. Since our fire stations were already well positioned to serve both cities and their contract districts, no changes were made in fire station placement, staffing, or equipment deployment. The only changes occurred in the renumbering of some stations and equipment, the adoption of common terminology, development of joint Metro standard operating procedures, and the modification of our computer dispatch files to reflect the new arrangement throughout both communities. In 2009, our departments commissioned a study to evaluate further collaboration between the two organizations. This work was completed last spring by one of our industry's leaders, Emergency Services Consulting International. The study results, which strongly endorse the merger proposal, were presented to you in June and discussed collectively by our joint councils at follow-up meetings in September and December. The Springfield City Council has also held a work session, like we are today, to discuss the initiative. At this point in time, we are ready to begin the next leg of our journey and functionally consolidate our administrative and support functions. The proposed consolidation includes the Fire Marshal's Office, training programs, ambulance billing. It designates a single deputy chief to oversee our shift operations and manage the 3-battalion system, and it aligns our department's special operations. We hope to follow this phase with the merging of our logistical and support functions, and finally, the Office of the Chief with the upcoming retirement of Chief Murphy this summer. The consolidation will ultimately cause a transition from maintaining two separate systems to the combining of both departments into one system. By developing common apparatus and equipment specifications, creating one way of conducting business, and delivering the supporting services, our communities realize a level of enhanced effectiveness while enjoying the cost savings created by eliminating redundancies. In the future, if this proves successful, we will need to evaluate and discuss governance. This new combined way of doing business can ultimately function under either a Metro governance model, which is basically using an ORS 190 agreement, which is where we are starting, or the formation of a special purpose district. Although the consultants favor the district, either option would allow us to continue to operate under the new and improved model. We believe the timing is right for this initiative. Both organizations have or anticipate key vacancies that will create opportunities for achieving success. Both cities face financial challenges while at the same time experiencing a more pronounced need for essential services in a downturn economy. Although the merger initiative alone will not solve our ambulance transport system fund deficit, it will provide an opportunity to explore further efficiencies within the system under a combined service delivery model. In short, we have very good reason to look past our geopolitical boundaries and explore ways to better serve our metro communities through partnership. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Mike?
First of all, Chief, thank you very much for you guys working, for you and the department and the folks in Springfield for working so hard to try and find this innovative solution. I think this is a great one at a time when we need it most. My understanding is that you've all had an opportunity to visit recently with the Tualatin Valley Fire District folks, or over time you've checked in with them, looked at that district model. How does the service delivery vary for people, for homeowners, for people, for residents in a district model versus the municipality model that we have now, even or with a 190 agreement? What's the key difference to the resident, I suppose?
As far as end service delivery, Counselor, it should be the same. I mean, there's always the opportunity in a merged model, a larger organization, reducing that administrative and support overhead that's attached to the service. In our communications, which we've talked with Tualatin Valley and Clackamas County since they merged years ago. I mean, we've kept in close contact. They are governments that we compare to. I think if you speak with your counterparts in Beaverton, for example, they've had very good experience. The main difference under the district model, which is one option, is there is another form of government that oversees that works with the individual city councilors and councils and communities. Again, that's one option.
I know we have a timing issue with the retirement of Chief Murphy, and I appreciate the savings we're going to get from some of the positions that we won't fill, but rather that we'll share duties with. But I, too, would like to see us taking incremental steps into this with check-in points and opportunity to evaluate as we go before we jump full and clean into a different sort of model, even if we see that as a benefit or a value to the residents long term. I'm cautious with this, but I'm very optimistic, so I appreciate all the work very much.
Thank you, Councilor. And to clarify, too, these first steps would just be an intergovernmental agreement between the two cities. It'd be merging some functions, much like we did with the 3-battalion system. When we presented that to you back in 2007, we said this is what we believe it will produce. We believe it's met or exceeded what we had promised, and we feel confident about these next steps as well. And we recognize this is a phased-in approach where we need to be able to show that the system performs in the way we believe it will.
Thank you.
Andrea?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Chief. And I'd like for the audience to kind of be acknowledged if there was an opportunity. We have Chief Murphy in the audience for the viewing public. We have, I know the president of the local Eugene Firefighters Department. I don't know if the Springfield? Not here. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure. And then also we have Commissioner Cassidy from EWEB sitting in audience. Hi.
Thank you for
we
doing
have
that.
part of our part of the contingency of folks that are actually I don't know what to call them, subcontractors.
Subcontractors, good working partners.
Yeah, Rural Metro, their leadership's in the room, so I just kind of wanted to acknowledge them also as part of the conversation because we're not in a funnel. I do feel like this is, this sounds like a good thing, but I just have some concerns as somebody who's sitting in this spot today as an elected official and just wondering in the wisdom of it. And so, it's been a little bit of a challenge as we've had this conversation, and I think I've shared a little bit of my concerns with you, Chief Groves. So the two questions that I have that are actually tangible questions. One of the issues is that there's, and I'm going to get smacked by the media for this one, of course, but the challenge is that part of our community wants to grow faster than the other. And so Springfield just went through a process where they've disconnected their urban growth boundary from us, and that's fine, and I respect their choices. So my challenge in thinking about it is we're working really hard to constrain our growth and to have infill and to have have our goals aligned with our growth management policies aligned with our growth. And I'm not saying that Springfield's going to grow rapidly, but that is kind of this balancing act that I have that I'm wondering how that's going to be addressed. So that's a challenge for me to put my arms around. And then the other, I don't know this for a fact, but it just seems to, I haven't compared wages across city of Eugene and city of Springfield, and that's not the issue. The issue that I'm wondering about is, it seems to me that if there's more people under leadership, that those numbers would go up in their level of responsibility. So for instance, Chief, if your counterpart of another fire district is over 3,000 people, chances are his income's higher than what we're paying you. So are those realized savings within your proposals? That's just kind of another concern I had. The more people that you have together, the more middle management we have. And so I'm just kind of concerned about how that's going to look in the outcome.
Taking your first question first, and pertaining to growth management and different cultures between the two communities. I use the C word, Counselor. There are organizations out there that actually mirror us very closely. One of them is the two cities of Livermore and Pleasanton down in the Bay Area in California. They operate under what's called a JPA, or Joint Powers Authority, which basically functions the same as an ORS 190 agreement. Those two cities are closer in size than Eugene and Springfield. However, there is one that is very pro-growth and one that is prefers to grow at a slower rate. And yet they've managed to make this system work. Essentially, the way we are looking at this, each city would still have its ability to influence how they'd receive service. And if growth in one community were to grow at such a fast rate that would require more resources, then we believe that should be the responsibility of that community to cover those costs. So there would still be a level of control and influence. Under the district model, for example, Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue, that's taken into consideration of the larger tax base. Some of this, again, is still speculation at this point, and the hard part for us, as hard as we've tried, as hard as the consultants have tried, it's impossible to nail down every cost, also nail down every savings. And we anticipate the likelihood of experiencing some of both as we go down this process. At the same time, at the end of the day, we believe we need to be able to show good value for the dollar spent. And the other thing I want to, before moving to your second question, I want to elaborate on is that we see this not only as a way to save resources and save money, but we believe it's a way to enhance our level of service. The training function, for example. Right now, both departments have, I would say, marginally staffed training sections. They're able to deliver the service, but there's a lot of redundancy there. We think through a merger, not only can we save money by reducing the highest level in the training division, the highest manager, one position, we can actually do a better job by eliminating the redundancies. Instead of carrying on two separate classes, the development and delivery, we can do that in one, which actually allows our resources to go further than we can now. So less cost, better service. Your second question regarding wages and comparables. Again, some of this is speculation. We would anticipate, like with our system now, the wages, they fluctuate. They tend to go mostly up. In a downturn economy like this, they tend to stay relatively flat. As far as comparables, as a merged organization, we probably would be compared to a larger organization. At the same time, we don't see additional middle management. We're trying to find ways to streamline and eliminate managerial positions. But at the same time, you also enjoy economies of scale through supply, order, and distribution. We believe developing a common specification, common for our equipment and our apparatus, there are potentials for savings there as well. So, there are costs, there are savings. And at the end of the day, we should be balancing that out so there's more savings than there are additional costs. But at the same time, we are not just looking at this in isolation of cost savings. We're also looking at what can we deliver in the way of service. And I think the 3-battalion system is an excellent demonstration how that has worked. We have provided better, safer service to the public in both communities through the merged operation.
Thank you for your comments, Chief. I really do appreciate your thought and work on this, and I really appreciate your comments regarding how the distribution of the cost, regardless of what size of the city is, that it would be rest with that city, because if I've heard anything, that's what I've heard out in the community.
Sure.
Thank you all for coming also.
Thank you.
Great. Good questions, good answers. Great. First round, I have Chris, and then George Poling, and then George Brown, and then Alan.
Thank you. Really good questions, and I appreciate the presentation. For me, it really goes back to why are we doing this, and I think, well, it's the service, it's the authority, and it's the money. I mean, those are the governing factors. What you're reassuring us, and what I believe is true, is that service will be enhanced by the ability to do this. In other words, we could keep them separate, and the service would not be as good as putting them together. We've already begun to see that in the 3-battalion system, that does tend to bear out. The authority, I think, is very important to people. They want to know that whatever you craft is going to be accountable, it's going to be open, and it's going to be functional. And I think whatever system we use, and I don't have a prejudice one way or the other, I just want to go with the system that's going to provide the greatest level of authority in terms of its accountability and its function. And then the last one, the money. You're really making a very effective case for why the money can be more effective. And those three really get at what, for me as a policymaker, is the key issue, and that is this an appropriate thing for us to do? For many people, fire services are a core service. And so the natural assumption is, as a core service, it should be done by the municipal government or the county government or whomever does it. The notion of taking a core service out of that and putting it in some independent place, I think, is a question that many people would have. And that leads to, well, if you're going to pull that core service out of your fund, out of your general fund, out of your budget, are you paying for things that you don't need to pay for in order to do that? Are you saving money by pulling out fire and then funding a whole lot of stuff that really is not as core? I think that's a very significant policy question for us to wrestle with. I think, for me, the trade-off between is this an appropriate thing to do, and it's going to be better service, it's going to have good authority, and it's going to save a lot of money, becomes the two balances on the end of this discussion. If you can really reflect significant savings, significantly improved service, and a good accountable authority, that's a very powerful argument for why you would want to pull it out. What I wouldn't want to see happen, though, and that's not your issue, that's our issue, is by pulling that out, that frees up a lot of money to just pay for stuff that maybe we don't need to pay for. You do it because the people leaving do things better, but you also do it because the people remaining are still going to be accountable and responsible for the money that's left. So as I say, that's not your issue, but it's one that occurs to me we have to wrestle with, because if we go through with this, we have to have a discussion about what we do with that opportunity, if you will, within our budgets when this is pulled out. So I think it's a good discussion. I think it's an important discussion, one we need to have. And there's issues for you, and there are also issues for us.
Well said. Thank you. Okay, George Polling.
Well, this is an issue that I think the stars are all aligned just in a great setting right now. I mean, the timing, excuse me, the timing's pretty good with the Chief Murphy getting ready to retire, our budgets being the way they are. You've got both unions are saying that this is the right direction to go, and I would venture to guess a majority of both our council and the Springfield City Council saying, yeah, this is looking good. So as far as the nuts and bolts of this thing, it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. I think that the service level will increase even more than it has since we started the 3-battalion system. Chris raised some good points about funding. If you go into a special service district, what does that do to the compression issue? And, there's just a lot of questions left around the funding as well as the governance. And, I think you brought up 3 different types. And the one that I'm least enamored with would be the newly elected board to go out and get another layer yet of government out there and get it started. But if that's where we end up to get this to work, I'll go ahead and I'll support that, because I think we need to really get moving on this very cautiously, but we need to get moving on this to get this in place to the ultimate goal. Having been on the Metropolitan Wastewater Board for 5 years, I got to see how that works. That's pretty good model to look at. Tweak it a little bit maybe, but that I think is a good model. Splitting up the responsibilities from equal number of counselors from both cities, that may be another way. Wherever it ends up, I'll go ahead and I'll support that type of governance just so we can get this in place and get the service to the members of this community, this entire community. Increase the amount of service and increase their safety.
Thank you, Councilor. If I could comment, one thing I want to make clear, too, we are not coming forward with any recommendation on governance. We are merely trying to take what seem to us the next logical steps in a progression where we can work through some of these issues and ensure that we are providing good value for the dollar.
Right, and I think that governance discussion is the other very important issue that the policymakers that we need to have, along with the issues that Chris raised with the funding issues. And I think that it's very important that we work very closely with Springfield on this, the Springfield Council, to come up with the best possible solution for this.
George Brown?
Thank you. Yeah, these projected savings are very attractive. I mean, anybody would think so. And it's something like, projected to be something like, if this goes forward, something like $600,000 the first year. Is that correct?
That's a rough number, and that's not just the general fund. That also includes the ambulance transport fund.
And then about $850,000 every year thereafter.
Ongoing. Those are projections that the consultant came up with. Some of the, for the 650, some of that is still pending retirements that haven't left yet. That does not include any of the economies of scale we believe we can find through supply order distribution.
Okay. Well, Councilor Ortiz and Councilor Polling those were some of my questions, and they were answered pretty well. But I'm got a question about the unions would merge. There's one idea. Instead of two firefighters unions, there would be one union. And I'm just wondering, since it's two different cities, is there a significant difference in pay scale between the two unions? And I'm assuming that if they did merge, then the ones that are making less, of course, will want to make the same, justly so, the higher scale, and that would eat into these savings a little bit.
If you want me to answer that
Yes,
point as we
please.
go, the two unions, whether or not they merge, that is completely up to the two locals. They're both affiliates of the International Association of Firefighters, and we do not have any influence over that. As far as a comparison of wages and benefits, both packages, both contracts have evolved over time and gone in slightly different directions, but the pay and benefits are not that far apart.
Okay, thanks. I'm really intrigued by your mention of Livermore Pleasanton as being two cities contiguous that are kind of like Eugene and Springfield, and I'd like to learn a lot more about that. It's called a JPA, Joint
It's called the Joint Powers Authority. We do not have the authority to form a JPA under current ORS. However, both the Eugene City Attorney and Springfield City Attorney have said that they can accomplish virtually the same thing under an ORS 190 agreement.
Okay. Is the information about this readily accessible on the web? Or
Yes,
do
it
you
is. On the
have
website,
any material that you could share with us?
we can
or-
get you a link to their annual report and to their website. Chief Murphy has mentioned a number of times to his council, and even at the, I think, the last JPA, or excuse me, too many acronyms, the last JEO meeting.
That would be
I'm
joint
working.
elected officials. Right?
Thank you. That would be it. Mentioned potential site visits. Of course, there's cost associated with that. It'd be very easy to get a bus and head north for the day and speak with Tualatin Valley and Clackamas to at least get a feel. There is the potential to go to Livermore and Pleasanton, or we could even look into possibly video conferencing or conference calls where we could get representatives from both the organization, the two cities, and elected officials even that could help as we go down this process and start considering what type of governance such a merged organization would operate under.
Well, that would be good. I've tried to find out, on the net about stuff about Tualatin and Clackamas, and they do have information, but it's not. I think what I was looking for was more of of course, they've been doing it for so long that this is probably way past them.
Yes.
But I was looking for information. How do people like it? How do they like the merger? How are they satisfied with it? What kind of problems may have come up with it? And there's none of that. But they've been established for 10 years or so.
Oh, more than that,
That's-
many years.
Oh, that's why.
Right.
Then. Okay.
What I've heard, because we've asked those kinds of questions, at least of our counterparts, and the fire services up there, much like the fire service organizations you find anywhere, the public tends to like them.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, and for good reason. I've been hearing this from constituents, and it's with a thought of my own about the two cities, one with an aggressive growth policy, or at least it's perceived that way, and another trying to, retain the urban growth boundary and do infill. And who's going to pay for the expansion of the one and the... So this is a concern, and that's why I'm interested in this model of Livermore Pleasanton. So thanks for bringing that up. Thank you.
One piece, if I could add to the whole growth discussion, whether we grow up or out, eventually requires more resources. Now, in communities that tend to grow up, they have fewer stations, but they have more firefighters and more apparatus assigned to those stations. Whenever you're going up, it takes a tremendous amount of resources to deliver personnel and equipment aloft. And some of you counselors learned that at the training opportunity that was provided here last year.
I think that's a really important point you just made,
Very
because that it doesn't matter how we accommodate it, whichever way we accommodate it comes with personnel and its own costs. So I think that's a really important. I do want to say, because I know our conversations will end up in newspapers or people will be watching them. I think that what we're trying to do here is have a conversation about perhaps some policy differences on the part of communities, but that is not without respect for everybody's right within their own communities to have their own policies and to move in the way that they make their decisions to do, and we're respectful of that. And I just want to emphasize that it's just we're trying to understand how that can work together and look for examples of how that has been accomplished in other places, so we can learn from that. So just
Very
want to
good.
be taken in that healthy vein, I guess is what I would say. Alan, you're next, and then Betty.
So there are things that I like about this and things that I have concerns about. I like the collaborative nature of it, of the two, and I think the 3-battalion system shows that can work and have benefits. I like the common equipment specs and economies of scale that we can get from that, and also the economies of scales of purchasing and potential service enhancements. I think that's going to be difficult to put metrics around and show that in the end, but I like that part of it. And I like the savings, and that they are based on positions going away as opposed to efficiencies to be gained later, which tend to not be very defined and sometimes are fictitious. So, but having said that, $850,000 on a $53 million total budget is real, but extremely modest. That's only 1.6% change over the entire budget. And that's not very big. It's not a great amount of savings. That doesn't lead, sounds like a lot of money, but in the larger context, $850,000 on $53 million total budget of the two agencies isn't that great. I would have expected to see more, and that can easily be lost in increase in wages or other things like that occur over time. I guess following up on Andrea's question about wages, so wage studies, in my experience with them, is that they're based on comparables. And when you compare the comparable entities of like size and like mission, and so when you go from small to big, wages usually follow in terms of the wages get higher. So would this merger make us jump into a new group of comparables that would potentially put us into a new class of wages?
That is a very good question. Part of the answer, just so that you understand the market that we are in right now, actually compares a lot of the same jurisdictions that we would be compared to under a merged organization. Under Senate Bill 750, which was a change in the way public collective bargaining works for the protective services of the Durfler-Bryant Act, we are limited in our market that we can compare with right now. For example, we cannot compare to the city of Portland. That is excluded as an anomaly. As far as our other comparators, we already have Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue in the mix because of the city of Beaverton. We have Salem in the mix. We have the larger organizations. If we were to merge and become one organization with one unit of government, then there may be some of the ones towards the bottom that come off the list, but they're already Portland metropolitan area departments. There's also a factor that goes into when we are bargaining, where you're looking at the cost of living for a specific jurisdiction, and I believe most arbitrators recognize the difference between the Portland metropolitan area and the cost of living there and other areas in Oregon. So that's not an exact scientific response, but that's what the reality we deal with right now.
So you mentioned that the two jurisdictions, Springfield and Eugene, are pretty close. Is Springfield higher or lower?
Our pay is not that much different. I'd have to have the contract right in front of me. I have looked at it. The wages are a little different, but there's different premium pays that kind of balance that out. For example, our middle managers in Eugene make slightly less than their counterparts in Springfield. So there are little discrepancies as you go through and differences between compensation packages in the two communities, but they are close.
Yeah, okay. I have a little concern about that because it could easily wipe out the savings. And I'm not going to approach this that there's a lot of savings here, so therefore we should do it, because I don't think that's true. I think it's pretty modest, actually. Have you guys quantified the efficiencies that you can get out and the economies of scale and the benefits of that?
We have done some of that. I mentioned the training program and what we could do there, where we actually are able to eliminate at least one position right now. We probably would not eliminate any additional trainers just because there are so many mandates that we have to keep up with in the fire service right now that we barely keep our head above water as it is. We believe that we can do a better job and be more efficient if we merge the function. For example, every year we put on a bloodborne pathogen training. Well, there's no reason we have to develop two classes. We can do one class, and whether we're one organization or not, we should be looking at things like that, and we are. But there are opportunities to gain efficiencies there. Our fire marshal's office, for example, if you brought the two communities together, it would make it a very good case for building a fire prevention program that has more specialization within the program. For example, you could take one deputy in Eugene that's maybe now doing schools and other institutions, and there's probably enough for one deputy fire marshal just to do schools between the two communities. Well, you develop expertise, you develop relationships. I believe these things can be quantified, but we need to travel down the trail a little bit in order to start measuring the effects of a merged organization. And we believe they aren't the first steps. This next series of steps gives us the opportunity to look at this further.
I'll need another round. I'll just go over my concerns a little bit. I have concerns about the organizational issues, we call them cultural issues. I have concerns about the governance and the funding and hearing from the public, and I guess I'll address those on the next round.
Okay. Patty, you're next.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. Those are my concerns, too, pretty much. It seems to me that some of the things you're talking about you can do right now if you want to, like the sharing the training. Mm-hmm. You can just talk to the other chief and do it, I would think. Is that true?
That's true.
And
we do quite a bit of it now. We think we can do more.
Buying the purchasing, the economy of purchasing, couldn't you? I've known cases where, like, this is a smaller scale, but two bike shops in two different cities put their purchases together because they got a better deal. Mm-hmm. And I would think you could do things of that sort already, so
Correct.
that we don't need. So you're talking partly about if we got to a district, that would be a extra government.
If we were to go to a district, again, we believe there's ways to merge the organizations. That's just one of several options.
It sounds to me as if that's the end that you're working toward. Maybe not. But I think I'm very concerned about when we get more governments, because it's harder for the public to be involved in multiple governments and to watch them even. And it would be new elections and all those things. And your steps first, you are the chief. If you are the chief of a lot more people, won't there be a lot more work?
No, I think it changes some of the what is focused on. For example, if as let's say chief over a merged organization, there would be responsibilities that would be assumed to the city of Springfield, but some of the things that I do now would probably be picked up by our deputy chiefs.
So would you need more deputy chiefs?
No, we could actually, through attrition, we think we can drop one deputy chief over time between the two organizations.
Does that mean that we now have more than we need, or?
Not as two separate organizations, we do not. As a merged organization, we probably do. You know, there's much larger organizations in the country than the merged department, whatever it is, between Eugene and Springfield, that only have one chief, one fire marshal, one assistant chief over operations.
So you wouldn't be working any harder then?
We're working pretty hard right now, so.
Just wondered. And you wouldn't need a big raise?
There's no raise built into this process for me.
Which city manager, if we go, we're not going to a district yet, if we do something, but which city manager is the boss then?
They both would be.
That sounds a little complicated.
The Springfield city manager would be the boss over what happens in Springfield. The Eugene city manager would be the boss over what happens in Eugene.
Sounds as if that would take a good deal of time. Another question I have, you said service would be improved. I thought we had good service already. Are we only partly putting out fires now or something?
We have very good service right now, Counselor, and we would continue to have good service.
I can't imagine it being any better.
We never settle for the status quo. We're always seeking to improve.
Well,
But I think an example.
I don't, it's not like police where you could say we could use more police and we could police more parts of town. The fire service, you go every place there's a fire, right?
Correct.
And, okay, John, you were going to explain
Probably
that.
a couple of, could be examples, and the chief can weigh in. Talk a little bit about training, to where actually you can
Yeah.
get enhanced training for less dollars. So by virtue of that, that's a service also. It's an internal service to training. I would suspect by having similar protocols or the same protocols, you can gain some efficiencies around that, because the organizations still do some coordination now, and by having the same protocols, I think that would provide some additional efficiencies and service, and as an example.
Can you give an example of that, of protocols that might be?
Absolutely. We've got, in our 3-battalion system right now, we've changed our policy so that the closest response order responds to calls for emergencies. So, for example, right now, especially along the I-5 corridor, we have mixed response packages that respond to those incidents. It's generally more than one unit that responds. In the case of a fire or hazardous materials release, it's multiple units, and you're getting the closest units, and then the units behind them are moving up to backfill the holes. So we keep a managed web of coverage throughout both jurisdictions. And by having changed our protocols, procedures, and policies in that area, and our response files, we actually are providing better service right now under the 3-battalion system. Again, these next steps would take that and start moving it into our administrative and support functions.
So what I was asking is, are there other protocols that you could, I know what you're already doing.
Oh, okay.
But you said...
Yes, the way that we would merge our training functions and how we would eliminate the redundancy there, we believe there's room in our fire marshal's office to have more efficiencies with more specialization for a larger area. We believe in the logistics, support, and supplies, being able, as you pointed out already, the common specifications as far as maintaining a lot of our equipment. There's all kinds of areas that are going to take time to build the system, but these next steps will give us that opportunity to do that.
Okay, I'm interested eventually in hearing what you can't do now that you want to do. Like you've said, the training and the cooperation on purchasing, you could already do if you want to. And another concern I still have is if Springfield sprawls way beyond where it is, doesn't it cost more to, I know it takes more time, to answer calls that are far out? You go greater distances.
As population grows and as territory increases, generally there are more stations that are added into the mix to maintain, response integrity. At the same time, as populations, as I said earlier,
Yeah,
grow and
yeah.
go up, that takes more resources as well.
But you go a longer distance if we spread out. And who will pay for the new fire stations? How do you decide that?
That would be the jurisdiction that's experiencing the growth. And as far as response times, I think another thing is important to remember with vertical growth. It's really, the time stamp is when we get to the emergency scene. For example, we may be able to get to the address side of a building faster in a compressed living footprint, but the clock doesn't stop until we go aloft and get to the floor where the problem is too. So, I mean, there's the response time is still a factor, even with compressed growth as it is with sprawl.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Just, Betty, to respond to your question, can't we be doing some things now? The answer is yes, and we are moving forward on, some of these training and logistics kinds of things, and so we are wanting to do that. The conversation, I think, really shifts when we start talking about a merger that involves different governance potentially, when we're really talking about one unit in the true sense of one unit. But we are moving forward on some of these other efficiency kinds of things.
The question that I'm hearing, though, I think, is what is it that you can do if you keep moving forward that you couldn't do now if you were choosing to go in that direction? Whatever it takes to sort of explain what you could do this now, but you could do something different if you are more merged. And I think that's what's being looked for here, because I think there's two things being said. One is, yes, we're moving down this road. Yes, we're doing these things, some of these things anyway. Then the question comes, well, then why do you need to merge if you can do this anyway? So I think you need an explanation of what is that thing that you couldn't do unless you actually do.
Go to that next step on
Yeah,
that, okay.
yeah.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
I can list a couple of them right now. For example, Office of the Chief. If you have two separate organizations, you're going to have two separate offices of the chief. There's some costs that goes along with that. You take our ambulance system that's in trouble financially right now between the two jurisdictions. You neutralize the impacts of revenue by shifting of resources, and there's the ability to move resources and change up the deployment across geopolitical lines. For example, if there's a little more capacity in the Springfield system than the Eugene system, you can move that around, or vice versa, to pick up those calls. Right now, it's even though we have closest unit order, our deployment also takes into consideration of keeping enough revenue mix in the system that the systems stay afloat. And right now, they're both operating at a deficit. So what it does is it helps with the positioning as well.
I think one of the, before we go into the second round, I have Mike and Andrea and Alan and Chris, and the comment I want to make is to sort of draw us back to why we're having this conversation in the first place, and that is we do have a funding issue, and we do want to provide excellent services for the people of our communities, and so we're looking for innovative ways to keep on providing those services within the means that we have, or the potential means that we could get, I suppose.
Right.
But that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for a way to honor the kind of services that people in our community expect, and to do it within our ability to pay for those services. And we're looking for innovative ways to try to, through efficiencies, better use of services, a little savings, all of those things that have come through in this report that would help us continue to do what we think our community really wants us to do. And that's the purpose. It isn't that we all woke up one morning and said, wouldn't it be fun to merge?
Right.
It really is to solve a basic challenge in our community that is important and a key core service in our community.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And one of the big areas, too, getting back to Councilor Taylor's question, one of the things that we can do as a merged organization that we can't do as separate organizations, right now, on any given day, we may have a vacancy in Eugene that necessitates that we hire overtime, Springfield may, on that same particular day, have an extra person on duty, which that just happens sometimes. And right now, we can't utilize that person in Eugene or send a Eugene person to Springfield because they're separate contracts and they're separate organizations. That's another area that can be added into the mix, is a merged organization, that we can't realize those savings today with separate organizations, even under these next steps we're going to take.
Thank you. Mike?
Chief, how much a really big ladder truck cost generally?
A really big ladder truck is over $1 million now.
Do we have a reason to have a redundant one?
Yes, we do.
Does Springfield have a redundant one?
Right now, they have just 2 staffed ladders. One's a ladder, one's called a truck company. They do not have a reserve.
But usually when they have redundant equipment, it's so that the department doesn't have a problem, and when we merge, we'll have less need for redundant equipment, thereby saving us money.
Correct.
That's, as I understand it, another benefit of this is the savings that comes from not needing as much redundant, very expensive redundant equipment. You touched on something earlier that is my chief concern, and that is that, and I thought of quite a while ago before we started talking about it, was that I'm actually concerned that we're going to add costs to this model before Springfield will, and whether or not we're preparing for it adequately. Now, Andrea and I think, disagree perhaps a little on how we would define what occurred with House Bill 3337. I don't think they want to grow faster than we do. I think we all want to grow economically. We all want to reduce unemployment at the same rate. But when we're talking about residential land, I think what happened is that the legislature said that we weren't doing an appropriate job of planning for that. And I think the proof's borne out by the initial assessments that they have a 150-acre surplus for residential land, while we have a several thousand-acre deficit with the preliminary look. So I'm actually more concerned that we're going to end up adding much more in the way of cost to this model than they will, because I don't see them moving their UGB too dramatically for the purposes of residential if they have a 150-acre surplus in their initial assessment, where we, with several thousand acres of deficit, may either have to or add to the height that he was talking about. So my question is, what are we doing to be appropriately prepared for what I think will be Eugene's higher drain on this as we go along? And I guess second, well, I'll let you address that question first. Because I think when we hit February of 11 and we have to adjust the UGB at that point, one way or another, or adjust our policies to compensate for that, we'll then begin to see that we'll begin to grow taller, or we'll have to move out, one or the other. That's my belief based on the preliminary data. So what are we doing to plan for that increase in drain from Eugene's standpoint?
Councilor, we actually are not keeping up with the growth we've had right now. We've gone from a mid-range ISO, Insurance Services Offices, ISO Class 2 department, which you're rated on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the best service, and there are no ones in the state of Oregon, 10 being no service. We have gone from a 2 to a 3, knocking on the door of a 4. And a lot of that's because we have not kept up with staffing levels. We have not kept up with some of the technological changes in our dispatch system. We are still a very, very good department, and even a Class 3 is a very good department, but we have lost ground. We're actually, we have lost ground.
Okay. I'm hearing you say that we're going to have to address that incrementally over time, but that we don't have any sort of plan to address that in one fell swoop with regard to this transition.
We have no plan to address that now, and I'm not advocating that we do in light of our financial situation.
Okay. And I think we're much more likely to add costs in Springfield anytime in the near future. Secondarily, what would you consider to be the key check-in, the logical check-in points along the way, along this path of change? Can you, from like a 30,000-foot level, tell us about some kind of logical check-in points to see, is this working well? What would that look like? What transition pieces should we be looking for?
Well, part of it depends what steps we take first, but I would think a 6-month and 1-year check-in point to say how it's going. I think it's hard to you almost need a fiscal year of measures, I believe, in order to really see, a trend up or a trend down, because, 6 months, depending when your purchaser made or not made, that can really skew your findings. So generally, it's good to have, I believe, a full year, and I think the fiscal year would be a nice line-up. In the case of what we're doing here now, I don't think it's a bad thing to kind of spool up the system and start making the changes prior to the change of the fiscal, and then measure a full fiscal to see where we are. But at the same time, I believe, in even a 6-month increment, we'll have some indicators. It's just, I prefer the 1 year.
Okay.
Mayor, can I just real quickly, just on the first question that you had, Mike, I think regardless of whether we were to merge with Springfield, we need to make sure we're planning for the future resource needs to ensure that we maintain a high quality of service. I suppose one advantage of, if you have a merged unit, and the chief alluded to it earlier, you do have an opportunity to balance resources across a broader geographic area, which can increase the efficiency of the use of those services. So it's just like with, rather than having 3 or 4 big ladder trucks in the area, maybe you only need 2, because you're able to balance resources. So you potentially have an opportunity to balance resources in that scenario then too.
Thank you. Now, Andrew.
So I know we're not supposed to be asking about ambulance stuff, but I'm just curious, in reading the information that you were given to us for today, you did talk a little bit about the billing, the ambulance billing, and I was just wondering, is that office part of the firefighters union, or are they under the AFSCME contract?
They're under the AFSCME contract in Eugene.
And so have we heard from them about, because it looks like there's,
We have involved AFSCME, and Springfield is involved. Their support unions along the process. They've been involved in the conversations.
and their comments are negative or positive, or have you gotten
The unions have, they've been watching. I believe they've been mostly supportive. I mean, there's always concerns with change. I have not heard outright opposition. I think in the case of Eugene's billing staff, I think they're a little bit more concerned about where this is going to go. But again, we've said we still need all the people we have in place in those functions, and this will not result in any loss of position.
That's good to hear, because that would be my concern, too. I don't want to have people become unemployed over this, but I do know that Springfield also contracts billing out for a lot of 11 other agencies, I guess.
I believe it's, we have Chief Murphy here, I believe it's 21.
What was it?
21 agencies.
Yeah.
They've done a very good job of insourcing.
Yeah, and I know several people that work there, and they're very happy with their jobs, and they do a fabulous job, and they work with community. So that's good to hear that that's your commitment in that regard. And then the other thing about our merger, I don't know, having Lane Rule at the table, they are very quiet and very respectful, and they're glad to be a part of the conversation, but what I don't know is how it will affect their ability, because I don't know this for a fact, but it just seems to me that when we've had to backfill other areas, that we've counted on them to help us in the west part of town, when we've had to concentrate all the services like Salem I-5, because they're closer than Springfield coming over here. So how is that still going to work that way?
Still work the same way. We still have a mutual aid and automatic aid arrangement with Lane Rural Fire Rescue. They're a good partner.
They are a good department.
They're a good partner, yes.
And they're part of our community, too, and I just want to, and we'll talk more about them when we do the ambulance stuff, but I just want to make sure that whatever we're doing doesn't have a negative effect on our partners.
The merger piece shouldn't have any negative impact. It's still the same basic service system, especially in that geographical area. As you know, because you were part of the JEO task force on ambulance transport funding, they were a part of that process. I think their biggest concern is if we go in this direction without doing anything else on the ambulance system, which, I've communicated we can't do that. It does nothing to help them in their financial situation, and their system is having the same issues as ours is, actually to a greater percentage.
Yes, I I'm aware of that. And the only thing I wanted to share was that I'm glad to hear that there's a commitment to continue to look at mass purchasing together. I know that historically, each individual organization had different equipment, and then when they would go into the hospital, it wouldn't match what the equipment that was available there. IVs, for instance, was a big issue for a really long time, and so it's kind of nice to see to have that streamlined, because that all is cost to the patient.
Right.
And so, and I know you work close with the hospital, and that you have one of our ER doctors as the medical director for your portion of that, so I think that only can augment better patient care.
We would like to see a standard specification for all of our equipment, and there's the potential for that going even beyond the metro area, but those are discussions that are yet to be had.
Well, thanks again for the work that all you've done. I really appreciate you bringing this forward.
Thank you.
And Alan?
I like hearing you talk, Chief, because I always get new phrases like web of coverage, response integrity, insourcing. It's always fun to add to my vocabulary when I hear you talk. So the four concerns that I had: organizational issues. You use the word cultural. I talked to the Eugene Union folks. Sounds like that part of the union thing can be worked out by a merger, and so I'm not too much worried about that. It's taking two organizations and smushing them together has all these different issues around that. Some are problems, some are good things, and I'm wondering how much you've thought about that and how you deal with the problematic parts of it.
Well, we've thought about that quite a bit. We've had a number of conversations regarding this. In Eugene, we have quarterly company officer meetings where we get all of our lead workers together, all of our captains. We've been talking about this for some time. I believe we are better situated today than we ever have been, primarily through the 3-battalion system. It's helped our two organizations, I believe, to grow, to mature together, to really enter into very respectful relationships, recognizing each other as valued colleagues, and that we depend on each other for not only our safety, but delivering of life-essential safety services.
To build on that, I think the other piece that as we move forward that we'll spend some more time on is not just within the fire departments, but in the city as a whole, what, if any, impacts would accrue. So, for example, if you have a merged department, IT support might look different. It may not, but it could look different, as an example, or HR support or finance support or whatever those are. And so that's another piece of the broader picture that we will be looking at as we continue down the sort of the looking and exploring mode.
And just adding on that, I think John is absolutely correct. I don't see the people in the streets being the problem. And in fact, I see more opportunity than I see challenges here to overcome. We have had a series of meetings already talking about how these different functions would work together. This is more than just, these conversations are taking place at more than just the chief level and the city manager level. We have staff that actually do the work, that are out there communicating and working together. We also have a series of meetings in front of us to do just what John was referring to. How do we bring together IT? How do we let Springfield employees enter our secure systems, and how do we take and enter their secure systems to work together? We have a roster system that we've been working on that can be merged that helps us do our work. There's all kinds of these opportunities that are before us, but it is still going to take a lot of hard work, and I don't think any of us are saying this is going to be a walk in the park. But it's not negative challenge. It's good challenge. It's exciting challenge. It's an opportunity to build a system, a better mousetrap, if you will.
Well, there's another one for you.
Yeah.
Heard that.
Oh, that's an old one. That on the list.
A web of mice traps.
A web of mice.
And it'll be under your bushel.
My next concern was about governance, and the 190 entity like MWMC would be my choice over a special district. I think, and I'm not ready to go there yet. I need to more fully understand how that would work, and learn more about how it would work. I understand how it works at MWNC. I'm not so sure I understand exactly how it works with two fire departments. So we're going to have that conversation. So, and then the third option is doing it within the existing structure contractually. The third concern that I had was around funding, and in part goes back to special districts. A special district that then would compete with Eugene's general fund and city government in general, and how that impacts compression gives me some concern and some pause to move in that direction. And then how does all those future costs get dealt with, and all these different complexities about who pays for what, and we need to know more about that. And then finally, I think we also need to hear from the public and the citizens of Eugene. I don't think we're rushing into this. We've been talking about it for 2 years, so that's if that's a rush, that brings a whole new meaning to the wheels of government move slowly. But I think the public has only been engaged in this conversation just recently. So I think we've been having a good internal conversation with the report that came out in July, and which took a long time to get there, but I think involving the public and getting some more feedback at this level when we've got some more meat on the bones, kind of, so to speak, is warranted here. And then finally, I guess where I want to go from here is I think this has a lot of intrigue to me. I want to move slowly with incremental steps, and I want to look clearly at what are the ways of gaining these savings and efficiencies within the existing structure contractually, and as the mayor kind of put it, so what can you do? Why do you need to do a merger? I think I'd like to see a memo that says, here's all the benefits that we're going to have. Here's how we can. Here's the ones that we can get through our existing structure contractually, and here's the ones that require us to do some kind of merger.
Alan?
And then finally, I just wanted to say that I'm really interested in fixing the ambulance funding problem first, without going towards privatization, and getting that handled, because I think that's where we started with all of this.
Okay, that's 29 seconds off your next round.
If I could just,
It's my super round.
thank you, Counselor. If I could just respond in part to the piece on public participation. We did, as part of the ambulance joint elected official task force, we did engage in 9 public forums about the ambulance system and the funding issue, and virtually all 9 of the forums turned more towards talking about the merger proposal than they did the ambulance piece. In addition to that, we have, both Chief Murphy and I have appeared and talked before both the Chamber of Commerce from both cities, as well as we did have a City Club appearance on this as well. So we have had actually 12 forums where we were in the public and engaging the public and receiving feedback from the public.
I just want to add to Alan's comments, so that I think we're going to have to keep the public engaged as we move along, but also this is just an opportunity for us right now, sitting around this table, to say to the folks who are watching this and paying it, that we welcome them surfacing other questions that come to their minds, and if there's things we can answer, we will want to do that as well. It's very important for them to have some clarity on where we're headed, and we would welcome them to do that. Chris, you're next.
Thank you. I was trying to do kind of an in my head, what Alan was talking about, kind of a comparison. And if you wanted to commit it to paper, that would probably be great. Actually, the area I was focusing in on was around kind of the monetary piece, because I think that's what a lot of people are concerned about or interested in. There's, to me, 3 kind of basic models. The first one is you don't change anything, you leave it kind of the way it is, and you just work within that structure. The second one is some sort of an intergovernmental agreement, which to me basically leaves the authority with the governing bodies, and that this thing allows a contractual agreement between them. And then the third one is a completely separate special purpose district, where you really go completely out and set something up. With regard to the money, the first option, where you just leave everything the way it is, then you're basically leaving $16 million with Springfield and $37.5 million with Eugene, and we figure out some efficiencies, but basically the money stays with the government, the employees stay with the governments, the governance stays with the governance, everything kind of just stays the way it is, and we try to work what we can. The second model, the intergovernmental agreement, my understanding is that the 16 million and the 37.5 million would still reside within those governments. The employees would still be employed by those governments, and you would work out some efficiencies at some higher administrative level or some functional changes, some training changes. There would be some, and that's what I'd be interested in knowing is what do those look like? How much of that 16 and 37 could we get either greater efficiency or more savings out of? What would that look like? And then the third one, if you created a complete separate district, would the 16 and the $37.5 million leave the cities and go into the special purpose districts, or would they remain with the cities? And the special purpose district is now charged with the task of coming up with a new $53 million. Because I think that's what people want to know. Are you talking about $53 new million, or are you shifting $53 million out of their respective governments and into the special purpose district?
I can say this, Counselor, in speaking with Chief Murphy and also the consultants, if we were to go to the district model, our vision was shifting the resources rather than double taxing the public. In fact, ESCI, the consulting firm, gave a tale of two cities in the formation of the Clackamas County Fire District Number 1. And up there, they had the city of Milwaukee and the city of Oregon City that went about this two different ways. I believe it was Milwaukee that voted for a shift. It moved it across, and it passed overwhelmingly. Oregon City, the first time out, tried to hold a pretty good portion back. The measure failed, and they had to come back with a full shift, and then it passed overwhelmingly. So, the public is concerned about that, I believe, and watching that. So we're trying to be accountable for the service. We're trying to be as streamlined as we can. And then the last point I wanted to make, the $37 million number, that counts all of our embedded costs as well. Our annual operating budget is down at $30 million range.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then whatever that amount is, it would shift over,
Sure.
which addresses then the compression issue. If you're moving the dollars, then you're not affecting compression.
Correct.
Unless then you start increasing city government or increasing district government, and then compression comes into play. And then the last point was, whichever system you used, I'm assuming that you would craft a structure where the amount that went into the system to pay for it was based on the population within that area, not necessarily within a jurisdiction. You got Eugene, you got Springfield, but if you have whether by intergovernmental agreement or by district, a service area, the amount being allocated in would be based on that service area, not just by Eugene or just by Springfield. So growth becomes not the issue as much as the population within that area.
That's one way. That's one way of applying
Okay.
that standard. That would be the district model. Also, I've brought this up before with the council. Is both cities already provide a level of regional service. For example, in Eugene, we provide protection, fire, rescue, EMS first response protection to 5 contract areas that bring money into the general fund every year. It's a good deal for them. It's a good deal for the city. So Eugene's response area today is right at $170,000. Springfield has 3 contract districts they serve that bumps up their population served as well. So we already have some of that calculated in, and the contract districts pay their fair share.
So part of then the comparison that could be created would the mechanism in place for figuring the costs by population, by number of calls, so that we could kind of compare how the different models work that way.
Sure, and that would be probably that next step in the process. These initial steps right now, we're just looking at what I've heard a lot of you, or some of you express interest in, where are the efficiencies right now, and that's what we're working towards.
Great, thank you.
So I want to thank Chief you for coming today, and I want to thank I want to express appreciation for the huge amount of work that's gone between these 2 city fire departments to help us look at this and look out to the future for what's best for both communities. Thank the unions for the same kind of effort on behalf of all of us. It sounds like to me, if you listen to all of us, there is for the most part, a real openness to moving down this path in some way. How that gets translated incrementally is still in front of us. But I thought it was a really good conversation today, and I appreciate the frankness that everybody had at the table, because that helps us figure out what needs to be addressed. And so I think we made some real progress today, and I know there's interest in moving us along this as rapidly as we're comfortable doing. But I feel like there's if I listen to everybody today, we want to hear from the public. I want to reiterate that again. Appreciate all the effort you've made thus far in that way, but sometimes people don't wake up until it's at hand. Right. So we want to be open to that. We want to let people know we are open to that. But I do think we are interested in trying to keep providing those services for our community, and we appreciate all the work that's gone in to bring these things for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
And that concludes our business for today. Thank you, everybody.